Hello, my stitchy friends. Welcome, welcome. It is day one of the Pollinator SAL, and I am so excited for this launch. Woo! It's been long awaited, right, at this point? Okay, so, this will show up on my page, but if you're new with us, my name is Laura. This is Lala D Stitches, and this is a little short video just about our Pollinator SAL. The pattern is In Praise of Pollinators by the Blue Flower. It's gorgeous. It launched at this spring's market, and I fell in love with it right away and kind of reached out to the masses and said, hey, would you wanna? And everybody was like, yeah. So here we are, a few months later, ready to get rocking and rolling on this. So here's the pattern, and I have broken it up into 7 different months. So let's see if I can be efficient about this while I chatter. 7 different months. We're not gonna do that. And so we will, we are gonna start. I debated actually pretty heavily where to start on this because you could kind of go in any of the corners would make sense. But as I kind of played with like the sizes of things and kind of which ones I wanted to do when, it made the most sense to do a center start. So we are going to start in this center bee skip this month. So I've made very helpful copy and paste art tools. So this is kind of the rough idea of what our first stitch is. We've got our outline, everything within that outline, which it's so funny. Somebody mentioned that this looks like a bear's face, and I assume that was intentional. But now I see it every time, like that this is a little bear. I have not used the bear as a pollinator. I have not researched that. I will, before our next meeting, but figure out if bears are pollinators. They might be. It would make sense in a lot of ways based on what I've read. Anyways, so everything within the bee skip, because that's how I originally saw this, was as a bee skip, kind of the hive. And then we've got our little squirrel, a little parrot, a little hummer, and 1 ladybug. So that is our stitching for the first month. Let me find some white paper here. I still can't find. I have recently moved and I cannot find my cardstock, so we'll just use this. So this is our first section. I hope that's showing clearly. I can't really see, but I thought that would make pretty easy, defined first start. So we'll start today, which is the 30th. Pre-recording this, so it's kind of a little tongue twisty, and we'll have this section done by May 30th, at which point I'll do another quick little video and we'll find out where we go next. So in this section, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pollinators, which is pretty fun. I'm going to clip art pictures of the pollinators in as I very quickly go through a couple fun facts about them. It'll be my first picture-in-picture editing, so that'll be kind of exciting. I've not done it before. Hopefully it works. If not, this will be a little anticlimactic, but still interesting. So the first one, right up at the top, so right up here, this little guy is a little parrot, and parrots are pollinators, which I think on some level made sense because we all know that hummingbirds are. They, eat nectar and stuff. But what I learned was that most birds pollinate during the day. Approximately 2,000 different kinds of birds are pollinators in the world. When a bird pollinates, it's called ornithophily, I think. And they are most important as pollinators in the places where bugs are scarce. They become the primary pollinators. So, and also most of the flowers that birds pollinate have no scent because they have pretty weak olfactory systems, so they use the color more of the flower more than the scent of the flower as an attraction. And so most of them are unscented. Kind of funny. The next one is our bumblebee. Where is our bumblebee? Which, oh heavens, I have mixed up which ones are which. Anyway, so the bumblebee, we have 3 different kinds of bees. We have our bumblebee, a honeybee, and a blue orchard mason bee. So that's pretty fun. It was really fun to read kind of the differences between the 3 bees because, I mean, obviously, again, it kind of is a logical assumption that there are many varieties of bees out there. But here are a couple facts about them. So bumblebees specifically store pollen in the long, scruffy hairs on their legs. And they actually make a pollen basket on their back legs, which you can actually see a bumblebee when they have those baskets full. You can see it with your naked eye. You don't need magnification or anything. Just a little yellow pocket on the back. Their pollination is called a buzz pollination due to kind of how they do it. So they kind of bring the pollen in, and then it sounded like there's some kind of like jaw motion accompanied by a wing motion, and that kind of like gets the pollen to where it needs to be. Bumblebees are the only known pollinators of potatoes. And then they're also the primary pollinators of most berries, tomatoes, and melons. So there you go. Save the bees. They become even more important as we go into other varieties. So the honeybee, obviously known for making honey, but the pollen doesn't stick to their legs. With honeybees are very fuzzy, and so the pollen actually sticks to their body hair and rolls into new flowers as they kind of, move from flower to flower. Let's see. The pollen, this was interesting. Pollen feeds the baby bees. So as they collect the pollen, that is what they feed their baby bees. And it works as a protein, excuse me. The pollen works as a protein for those little babies. And then the nectar that they gather becomes honey. So they gather both nectar and pollen for different purposes, which I thought was really interesting. So the blue orchard mason bee, which took a little bit of research, I was like, is this artistic license? This pretty blue bee down here that looks almost more like a wasp, but no, it's a real thing. In fact, there are 140 different varieties, different species in North America of the mason bees. And they have stiff hairs on their tummy, and that's how they gather as they go from flower to flower. That's how they gather their pollen. They primarily pollinate fruit trees. So isn't this interesting? The first ones were potatoes and berries and melons. Next ones, honeybees, are, flowers is what they primarily pollinate, but then the materials that they gather serve very specific purposes. And then the mason bees primarily are the fruit tree pollinators. And so, yeah, pretty cool. The next one, and it's debatable, I may have gotten my section a little, it's either this little guy or this guy. We're being a little flexible. I have an email out to Janine, and hopefully she'll respond and kind of let me know what the specific featured pollinators were according, to her design, because this is her, she obviously did the research too to see what was a pollinator and what wasn't. Or maybe she's just brilliant and knew it. But anyways, we'll see what she says, and if I have made any errors, I'll definitely correct that next month. But according to my research and what I kind of found, this, I believe, is, and again, I'm not sure if it's this big one or this one over here, which is technically part of another month, but I have it here in my list, and I did research. So that's a white sand wasp. Wasps, I would not, I mean, again, it kind of makes sense that they would be pollinators simply because they're flying around and, you know, they're very similar to bees in a lot of ways. But I'd never, like, consciously think of wasps as pollinators just because they're such nasty little goobers most of the time. Anyway, so the white sand wasp has about 19 species in North America. It's often called a little white bee, which is incorrect. It is not a bee, it is a wasp. And they are accidental pollinators. So as they're seeking food, which is their nectar, they eat nectar. They are not intentionally pollinating or doing anything like that. They're not using it for the flowers for anything other than nectar for food. But they accidentally basically wind up becoming pollinators because their motion, their feeding patterns by nature move from, you know, species to species of plant. And so they are accidental pollinators. So there you go. Last two, the ladybug. First of all, misnomer, not all female. I didn't realize that they live about a year long. I usually think of most insects as having a rather short shelf life, if you will. But they live for a year once they're full grown, and they pollinate with movement. So as they travel from place to place, you could almost probably categorize them also as accidental pollinators, because their migration basically is what does the pollination. And last but not least, this one was very interesting, squirrels. And that guy is right on the side wall here, kind of grayed out, but that little guy. And it took a little bit of research to find squirrels as pollinators, but it turns out that it's a relatively newly confirmed pollinator, primarily in Southeast Asia. In fact, in Southeast Asia, they are one of the main pollinators, and they pollinate by, again, there's this big flower that they call it, like, I didn't write it down, but I want to say that it was a burst motion. And what that does is it makes it so that the flower opens wider than your average flower would, so that the squirrels can get to the inner heart of it. And that as they do that, as they seek out that, it was a long article, I skimmed it and it was very scientific, but basically the pollen gathers in the hairs around their lower jaw and in their fingers, and their pollination process is called macrocarpa. Anyways, so Southeast Asia, pollinating squirrels. Pretty adorable. I love that. So that's our first collection of pollinators, and our largest collection. The rest of them have 2, maybe 3 pollinators in each section because there's a lot more fauna mixed into them. But the center was primarily just pollinators. A couple last little facts to leave you with, which is very interesting. And this comes from pollinators.org. 75 to 90% of all flowering plants in the world need pollinators to exist. That's over 180,000 plant species and over 12,000 crops that require pollination to exist. Those are huge numbers. And to boil it down just a little bit more, that means 1 out of every 3 bites of food we consume as humans is there because of pollination. So protect the pollinators. It'll be so much fun to learn about the pollinators, and I hope you have as much fun as I do stitching our first section. I'm so excited to do this, and happy stitching, my friends. I will see you on May 30th for part 2.